that it is time for people to say things that make people uncomfortable, and that it is time for someone for people to say things that hold the nation and hold elected officials and members of our communities accountable.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the one-on-one interview series through the First Amendment Museum, located right here in beautiful, sunny Augusta, Maine. I'm Max Nospish, the manager of visitor experiences here at the First Amendment Museum. And today I'm joined by a wonderful guest, very interesting guest, Dr. Professor Stephen Graves. Stephen, if you want to introduce yourself.
Wonderful, thank you. Dr. Stephen Graves. I am an assistant professor at the University of Missouri in the Department of Black Studies, also a founder of Troublesome Movement, a nonprofit that's directed for education and empowerment of oppressed and minorities. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to it. So thank you for having me.
Awesome, thank you. So why do you think the First Amendment is important? What is its purpose?
I think it's important because I think that its purpose is to protect us from government. The exchange of ideas comes with the ability for people to kind of think outside of the box, to be able to kind of have ideas outside of the box. And I think that to be able to express those ideas freely without persecution is very important. But when I think about speech and freedom of assembly and freedom of the press, I'm thinking about the right to complain and the right to be freedom from government. I think that when you think of the kind of, the current state for which we find ourselves, in America, that this idea and this ability to kind of complain against what government is doing, whether on either side, but also to kind of have the opportunity to assemble with other people who think like you do, continues to be important. But I think that it also comes with certain barriers and restrictions that need to be mindful. But there still needs to be the ability and the freedom for people to be able to complain on either side. We get in this discussion a lot in my classes about taxes, and always comes around election cycle time, right? If you don't vote, you can't complain. I'm like, that's insane. And I'm going to complain. Whether I vote or not, I'm going to complain. You have the right to complain against government, whether you pay taxes, whether you vote, whether you're not. You're here. You're subject to the laws. You get out there and complain whether you pay taxes, whether you voted or not. That's one of the inherent rights that we have as individuals to do, is complain when we're being mistreated, when we feel like government has overstepped its bounds. And so when I think of the First Amendment and why it's important, Roasted, I think of those protections for us to complain, against government and against other individuals, and to have that freedom to express our dissatisfaction from government as well. So I think of protection.
You wrote a book entitled A Crisis of Leadership and the Role of Citizens in Black America, Leaders of the News School. Could you tell me a little bit about that book and what's it about?
Well, it really tries to take a kind of political, philosophical examination of some classical texts around the kind of concept and idea of citizenship and leadership. I first started out looking at this idea of citizenship and what it means to be a citizen, looking at it in a basic sense, right? As a belonging, a member of a team, member of a community, member of a nation, when you think of it, right? And so the idea is that this idea of being a citizen goes through phases for which the value of being a citizen kind of erodes, and it kind of has its value. But America is out there doing great things, and our patriotism is high and our value is high. It's because we're out there doing justice and people have a good feeling about being American. On the other hand, though, when America has a perception of being unjust and going the wrong way, how good do I feel about it being American? Sometimes it's like, not so much, right? And so the problem, of course, that I kind of highlight in this book is that the idea of citizenship, as we kind of see it, also erodes in value when it's freely given and it doesn't have responsibilities or commitment that kind of comes with it, right? So yes, if I'm just giving something free, if I'm just granted these rights of citizenship and these protections without having to contribute nothing or add nothing to the team to get it, well, that also creates erosion and a lack of value for it. Thus, then it's really then about creating this relationship between the state or government or leadership and a citizen, where there is a responsibility and a commitment of citizens, not just these freely guaranteed rights, but you also have an obligation to the team of Roasted to kind of make it work, right? It's sustainment and protection and improvement I highlight in the book. The key then in the book then is this idea of leadership and who the leaders then are. And they're the ones who kind of intercede and set a new standard during that erosion. And they keep that community, they keep those citizens, they keep the people, the masses, their constituents, they keep them eyes on the prize. They continue to set a standard. They continue to, kind of motivate the masses through those kind of evolutions and those ways for which they always keep their eyes on the prize, keep the go going. Thus, in the book includes, particularly in the Black community, and I would probably highlight this amongst most communities, that we have just had a crisis, a derelict of duty, and a lack of leadership in the Black community pretty much since 1970. By the end of Malcolm and the end of Martin Luther King in the late 60s, by 1970, there is no Black leadership in the Black community pretty much since then. It has all been, individualistic, right? The society and the community, capitalism allows for individuals to become successful, but that collective action, that collective improvement, that collective upliftment has been gone because we have no leadership and no leaders for which are willing to set that standard, hold the Black community accountable, right? And have innovative, creative ideas and intelligence to kind of maneuver through and be willing to pay the price of suffering and impact when it comes to making tough decisions. So that's really kind of where the book tries to move itself. And I think that it'll continue to kind of have, a kind of impact as we kind of continue to see how this nation continues to go.
And you're the founder of the Troublesome Movement. And so what is that? What kind of work does the Troublesome Movement do?
We really try to expand upon those ideas of servant leadership that are kind of a brainstorm really from the book. So we really kind of started out with the idea of with young students kind of leading the movement and kind of leading the ideas and the framework for how we kind of got started. Lecture halls to kind of educate the public on important things that were kind of happening in the city of Gresham when we were kind of founding it up. During that time, there was a lot of legislation around unions and marijuana legislation and things kind of coming, and students and young people really wanted to kind of have a platform to kind of educate people about how this is kind of coming up. And that's kind of how we kind of got going. In addition to that, of course, with gentrification and increasing neighborhood things, there was a lot of poverty and then kind of also a lot of help that needed to kind of be done in the community as well. And so we kind of looked to fulfill that role as well with Christmas, toy drives and Thanksgiving drives and school drives and trying to really kind of help needy families. But we're really in the stages now of kind of evolving into a kind of a community empowering and creating that educational network. We're partnering together with some other organizations, the Missouri Prison Outreach Program here in Missouri, to kind of do prison reform and prison education. So we're really kind of focused on empowering oppressed groups, empowering disadvantaged populations, and giving them the tools of self-sufficiency and self-dependence. And that's really where the kind of the nonprofit and where the organization sees itself moving in the future.
Awesome. And why the name Troublesome Movement? Where'd that come from?
Because I find the status quo is to be problematic. And if you're a firm believer, if you're rootedly and steeply grounded in the status quo, then the ideas and the innovation and the way that we go about things is going to be problematic to you. And that's troublesome. Really kind of made that sound and made us feel kind of what we were trying to do at our core.
I like it. So you also wrote a chapter in a book entitled Black Nationalism and the Presidency of Donald Trump. I'm intrigued by that title. What is the relationship between Black nationalism and Donald Trump's presidency? I don't think I've heard anything about this.
Well, Black nationalism really being on this idea that Black people in America in particular, for the purpose of this chapter, is really focused on the idea that Black people as a separate and distinct and unique group should have access to and should be empowered to control their own lives and control their own politics and control their own communities. And what we've kind of seen and what the book kind of highlights is that, post 2016 and during the kind of Trump era, we have seen in this country an increased amount of white identity and white national extremism, right, kind of take place. So the argument kind of makes, of course, then as Black people kind of witness this kind of increase, and on top of police brutality, right, lack of voting rights, this the student loan forgiveness thing, and all the other kind of misfortunes or lack of opportunities that that have been awarded to us via politics. And so one of the things that we kind of highlight, of course, 2016 is that the movement for Black people in this country should be and looks and appears to be a movement much more towards Black building institutions, set Black self-reliance and self-dependence in order to improve and condition ourselves. And so down the road, as that fear continues to grow and voting rights get more restricted, and this, and this far right extremism continues to kind of push against minorities, that Black people are going to need a nationalistic identity and ideology to kind of keep themselves protected and continue to allow themselves to advance and improve their material conditions in this country as that kind of fear amongst whites continues to kind of grow.
And so how do you utilize the First Amendment in your everyday life?
Mainly by having the opportunity to say things that otherwise would make people uncomfortable. And that's part of the job. I think in the classroom, I think that part of the thing is for me to make students uncomfortable and to say things that they might not necessarily agree with, things that they might not have heard before, and ideas and solutions to problems that they may not ever considered, and that sound to them in this day, extreme and or unrealistic. And so every day, as I, in my nonprofit work, as I advocate, for Black people in this country and for other disadvantaged groups, that freedom to continue to express my dissatisfaction with the status quo. And as our democracy and as our country continues to kind of go down this path, continues to evolve, that it is time for people to say things that make people uncomfortable, and that it is time for someone for people to say things that hold the nation and hold elected officials and members of our communities accountable. And it's not always going to be nice and friendly, and it's not always going to be painted really nice. But it still needs to be said, and those things still need to be addressed, no matter how, if you like the person, like how it comes out. And so I think that's important. I think that that's the best way that we're going to get forward, and I'll continue to utilize that, in my works and in the classroom.
Right. And I think that's one of the essences of the First Amendment, or maybe the essence of the First Amendment, is saying things that make people uncomfortable, especially people in or institutions even of power and people within those institutions.
If there is a safety mechanism for which, you can rely on people to be reasonable and responsible, right? Again, this idea that, yes, I'm going to say some outlandish, crazy things, but I am also under the premise that you guys are responsible enough to accept what I'm about to say, and be able to filter amongst it and kind of pull, the strengths and weaknesses out of it. But if I'm just allowed to just go off the cuff and your ability to deflect from what I'm saying is eroding, then I think we're going to have problems. And I think now we've got just a plethora of now where we got, everything is fake news, even when someone's telling the truth. Like, if you can't convince people with facts anymore in this society, we are done for. We're going the wrong way. You can't convince people with facts when we got nothing less, because feelings and emotions will just, they won't suffice. That you can't win politics with that. You can't improve society with that. You've got to be able to have a reason, right, and rationality in facts. But if we can't convince the public with facts, we've got a problem. We've got a big problem.
So, Professor Graves, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation, and thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to do this, to join us for this episode. Do you have anything that you want to promote, get out there, amplify, any ways people can reach you, just anything at all that you want to, or any final thoughts, whatever you have your open mic?
No, I appreciate it. I think that, again, I appreciate you highlighting the book. If you get a chance, on Amazon. I've got some other works that are coming along the way on Du Bois and Nietzsche, and I got a book on Tupac Shakur's political philosophy that I'm working on, and a book on the birth of ignorance, about the founding fathers and how they are responsible for this mess that we're currently in. Additionally, of course, you can find Troublesome Movement on troublesomemovement.org. I got the website, it's gravyology.com, and you can find the podcast, It's All Gravy, on Apple, iTunes, Spotify, Pandora, all the things that these young people are on these days. I can't even keep up with all the different platforms now, but it's on all of those things. So yes, Twitter, you can definitely find me. I appreciate it.
All right, Professor Graves, thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you.